Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I am David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the JoBoxers, the British new wave band that were formed in 1982, had massive hits, including Boxerbeat, that got to number 1 or 2 in the charts, followed by that classic chart-topping track, Just Got Lucky, which broke the band internationally and sold over 250,000 records. Anyway, at the weekend I spoke to their lead singer, Dick Wayne, sometimes known, well, he's known as Timothy Wayne Bull. He was in California, I was in Norwich. We got on fabulously well. So anyway, this is it. This is the interview. So after much interest and chat, well, just a little bit, as you do in the world of show business, we got down to the very nitty-gritty. Yes, we're going to talk about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Anyway, to start it off, let's talk about your early formative years. Dig, Timothy, it's over to you.
Well, there was several different ones, actually. You know, I was born probably about 10 years before you. So, you know, I had a lot of different influences. You know, the earliest thing I remember is that made an impression on me was I remember seeing Elvis Presley on the Ed Sullivan Show. Right. When I was a little kid, I saw Elvis Presley, and that made a real impression on me. I never forgot that. I remember I saw him. I think he was on the Ed Sullivan Show. Then he was on the Milton Berle Show, and there was one of those shows where they wouldn't show him from the waist down. You know, it was a famous, you know, episode where they, you know, his movements his gyrations were just too salacious for network television in those days.
This is true.
But that made a big impression on me. And then, of course, seeing the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, that made a big impression on me as well. I'll never forget that. And then, of course, Motown. You know, Motown was the thing that was really, well, it was a black thing, so it was something I could relate to more. I saw myself in those people in Motown. I didn't see myself in Elvis Presley. You know, I didn't see myself in the Beatles, but Motown was a real, you know, and just early rock and roll. I mean, you know, Little Richard, you know, all early 50s rock and roll was something, even though I was too little to go and buy records when those guys were making records. As soon as I was old enough to, I think Elvis was the one that turned me on to rock and roll. I thought of rock and roll. My mother, funny enough, my mother had a Gene Vincent. She had Bebop-A-Lula.
Right.
She had the single Bebop-A-Lula when my sister and I were kids. And we used to listen to that and just crack up because that one bit when he'd go, she's the one that gives me, he'd go, more, more, more. And we used to thought that was so funny, the way he would breathe like that. We never heard anyone breathe on a record like that, you know. So that was important. And it's so funny because that Bebop-A-Lula, years later, that was the real impetus that connected me to rockabilly.
Right.
You know, when I got into rockabilly in the 70s, in the late 70s, that's when I thought, you know, because rockabilly would seem to be such a white guy driven sort of music. And I thought, well, wait a minute, it's all from rock and roll, and I have a claim to rock and roll. So, you know, so it kind of legitimized me doing rockabilly. You know, I thought, you know, in that Gene Vincent record, and just, you know, once I started exploring rockabilly, I started finding out that, you know, all the rockabilly people loved black rhythm and blues. So
yes.
I wasn't that far off the mark, you know. I just was like the only black guy doing rockabilly at the time. So,
well, it's interesting.
You know,
I was going to say, it's always interesting because David Bowie, thankfully, was my first love and my first single. And also I loved Lemmy from Motorhead. And whenever they spoke, they were born just after the Second World War. And they would always say their main influence was, you know, Little Richard. It was seeing Little Richard that sort of changed everything. And I guess it would have been just for a young child, just going, wow, that's something else. You know?
Yeah, those guys are a little bit older than me, so they, you know, and they were born in the late 40s.
Yes.
You know, so that made them, you know, they came of age a little bit sooner. So yeah, I mean, I remember David Bowie. He made a big impression on me too, because there was a time in my life when I was very much into Lou Reed.
Right.
You know, before I discovered rockabilly and thought I was really going to be wanted to be a real rock and roll star. I was still in Ohio, and I just was crazy about Lou Reed. And there was something about it. It wasn't glam, but I was still very aware of like glam bands. I remember Slade, and that's about as far as I went. Slade, probably. I never listened to Sweet and some of those groups, those real glam bands. And so David Bowie, I remember that Spiders from Mars, Ziggy Stardust album was like, whoa, me and my friends were like, this dude is from outer space, it was, but I was a little older, so it didn't kind of consume me.
Yes. Well, did the kind of, because you mentioned in the 60s kind of Motown, and probably James Brown as well was a huge influence.
Oh yeah.
And all those kind of, I suppose a lot of people like Jackie Wilson, who probably wasn't kind of Motown, but he was, one of my favorite soul singers from that period. Did you also kind of pick up on that kind of that psychedelic world that was happening in around 67 with the, like Jimi Hendrix and the Doors and the West Coast, thing with Jefferson Airplane and possibly the Grateful Dead? Did that kind of interest you at all? Were you
not really? I was interested in Jimi Hendrix, of course. I wasn't interested in the Grateful Dead at all. I not at all. That was, to me, was like just hippie shit. I didn't have anything to do with the Grateful Dead. It's like, to this day, I'm like, ugh. I hear a Grateful Dead record, I'm like, please, no, I can't get to that at all. No. But yeah, Jimi Hendrix and Love, yes. Arthur Lee and Love, that was cool because, here was a black guy in a kind of a white band, singing kind of rock and roll psychedelic, not wearing soul clothes, not a soul singer. So I gravitated towards that. I thought that was a real, he was something a guy that I really looked to. And of course, Jimi Hendrix, I remember seeing that first Jimi Hendrix record, and my friend and I were in like a five and dime, like a J.C. Penney's or a SS Kresge, little, 5 and dime store in my hometown, Cambridge, Ohio. And I think we were in junior high, probably in the 7th grade or something. And we were looking, there was this little record area where they sold albums in 45s, yes. And the 45s were like $1. And I think the albums were $2.99 or something, and we would always go and look through these records. And the first day we saw that "Are You Experienced" album, we were like just completely blown away. It was like, oh man, we thought he was a crazy Mexican guy. He must be some Mexican dude, And he had that picture with the eyeballs on his shirt and that kind of frog eye lens, It was just, we took it home. We took it to my friend's house and put that record on, and that was it. It changed our lives. It really did. It changed our lives.
Well, I
never
remember
heard anything like that.
I don't know if it was so easy to see. It wasn't when I was growing up, even in the 80s, but things like the Monterey Pop Festival and also Woodstock, you had Jimi Hendrix there, and you also had, you also saw those kind of Sly and the Family Stone. That was the one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So sort of Woodstock was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. That's kind of like something else, isn't it? So
yeah, even Richie Havens, black folk singer, he was very cool, in a whole different way. Wasn't like he didn't set he wasn't a model for me, but I noticed him, being yes. Black, I noticed the guys who were doing it, who weren't doing soul music per se. Even later on, Bill Withers was like an interesting black singer, because he was, just in jeans and a t-shirt and a denim jacket and an acoustic guitar. It's like, what is this guy? But he's like one of the greatest songwriters, in the world.
Yes, absolutely. And then obviously, because you mentioned, that I suppose that Transformer, I guess you're thinking of the Lou Reed Transformer album that David Bowie produced, the one with all the hits on, because that was quite an album. Did that sort of lead you into other territory in that sort of world that was slightly, I suppose, because I'm just thinking New York, and it became part of that punk scene with the New York Dolls and Iggy Pop, and CBGBs. Did that sort of lead you that direction at all, or not?
Well, it wasn't so much that Transformer album that really got me into Lou Reed. I wasn't really into the Velvet Underground particularly. I got into Lou Reed more like Sally Can't Dance.
Right.
Around the time when he had his hair blonde and the sunglasses, and he was like hitting up on stage, and he would tie. I saw that tour where he came out like he was, skeleton skinny in a black sleeveless T-shirt, and he did the song Heroin, and he tied himself off and mimed, jacking himself up on stage. And it was like, this guy, So yeah, it wasn't the Transformer period. It was a little bit later that I got into Lou Reed. I later went back and listened to Transformer and all that stuff, and it didn't do the same thing for me that the later Lou Reed stuff did.
Right, because I know he was a massive Sam and Dave fan, wasn't he? He loved Sam and Dave. So I started getting really into, yes, dancing. Dance music was one of his things, wasn't it? In that kind of latter part of the 70s. But then
he was also big into doo-wop. He really loved doo-wop. There's
Yes.
really early Lou Reed stuff where he's like, you know, you can see he's like been listening to like Brooklyn doo-wop. And, you know, it's like, it's really strange to think that was his influence, was doo-wop music. You would never hear that in, you know, Waiting for the Man.
No, not at all. And because then, you know, as the 70s progressed, because I had a brother who was 7 years older than me, and he was really into prog rock, and I was quite young, and I looked up to him. So I too sort of wanted to listen to those albums, but then was kind of, I'm still kind of quite young at that stage. So punk didn't really sort of hit me because I was only about 12. And it was like, you couldn't at that stage in the 70s just go and listen to something just because you read about it or could see something about the Sex Pistols. It just wasn't like, oh yes, I'll go and listen. You'd have to go and get some money, which took weeks, if not months, to save up and buy a record. You know, it wasn't, you know, like, oh, I'll just go and listen to the Sex Pistols album, you know, it would have been like, so I went around going, has anybody listened to it? What's all this, you know, God Save the Queen? But no one.
That's very funny. Well, to finish that, what you asked me before, you know, as far as punk, getting into punk, that was I went from like the Lou Reed thing, that led me into punk, you know, that led me into like the New York scene. I was still in Ohio, and I'll never forget, this is probably around 1976 or 77. A friend of mine had been in Chicago, and he said, let's go to Chicago. He lived in Chicago for a while, and he came back to Ohio. He said, let's go to Chicago. I would take you to some clubs. And at that point, I was really into the Sex Pistols. I was going to this one record store buying all the imported, you know, 45 punk imported 45s, Slaughter and the Dogs, and you know, I think they had Sniffing Glue magazine, you know, all that early punk stuff, you know, and I found it very exciting because it was so new. It's like I'd never heard anything like this. And it seemed so raw and exciting that, you know, you didn't have to be particularly talented. You just had to have this attitude and look right. And that whole idea was, you know, it was very appealing to young people. So we went to Chicago. He took me to some clubs, and they were playing rockabilly and punk music in these clubs in Chicago. And so I went back to Ohio, and I thought, yeah, that's that combination of things. And so at the time I was wearing, like, I remember I had some X-ray specs, and we were wearing safety pins. We were really taking some of that English punk thing. And then a friend of mine went to New York, and he came back with the first Ramones album. And he said, listen to this. And we put it on, and it was like, you know, that again was like, wow, these, you know, like these 2-minute songs that were just grabbed you by the throat, you know, and they were in and out, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they were off, you know, and that was exciting. I thought, I got to go to New York, you know, and then from there, I mean, I was into the Stooges when I was in high school. You know, I saw the Stooges, you know, before he was Iggy Pop. So I went to a pop festival called Goose Lake, and I saw Mountain 10 years after, you know, the Stooges. Who else? I mean, yeah, it was incredible. So, you know, so Iggy was really early on for that stuff. But yeah, so, you know, then I got into Richard Hell and the Voidoids. I started getting into all these New York bands. Yeah. And eventually I went to New York, and, you know, the New York Dolls. I remember seeing that first New York Dolls album in Ohio, and it was like, I got to go to New York City. You know, that's where it's at. I got to get out of Ohio. And funny enough, you know, I was getting Rock Scene magazine and reading about all, you know, Max's Kansas City and CBGB's and all these clubs in New York, all these pictures of all these people hanging out in these clubs. I thought, man, I got to go there. And Trash and Vaudeville as well, which was the clothing store. And they sold these skinny black jeans. And that was the thing to have. I wasn't thin enough to wear skinny black jeans, but I thought, well, that's cool, still cool. So when I finally did move to New York in late 1978, I got a job at Trash and Vaudeville, you know, and I used to work at Trash and Vaudeville.
So was that the equivalent of like Malcolm McLaren's kind of shop with Vivienne Westwood, you know?
Boy, kind of. Yeah, it was kind of like that. It was also a little bit of Johnson's. You know, There were another shop on the King's Road, because the guy who ran Trash, he used to come to England and buy stuff from Johnson's and then ship it back and sell in Trash and Vaudeville. But working at Trash and Vaudeville got me really acquainted to that New York scene, because everybody would come into Trash and Vaudeville. I mean, Bruce Springsteen would come in there, John Belushi would come in there, Alice Cooper, everybody. No one was too famous to go into Trash and Vaudeville.
Right.
Being a kid from Ohio working in Trash and Vaudeville, then I wanted to start a band. I started my rockabilly band, and we got pretty well known around the city. So and next thing you know, go ahead.
So you were into rockabilly in New York City?
Yeah.
Because I've done a couple of interviews with members of the Rockettes who had sort of, because they were kind of Smithy Smith and Levi Dexter and Tim Scott McConnell, so those guys. So you knew those guys, that whole scene.
Oh, yeah. I met Levi and Smutty in Kentucky before any of us had moved to New York. Because when I was still in Ohio, I was trying to start a rockabilly band. Hang on, let me change this. I was trying to start a rockabilly band, and I couldn't find any players. So I put an ad in a local newspaper saying, we're looking for rockabilly guitar players. And him and Smutty had just been brought over from England by Lee Childers.
Yes,
and Lee Black Childers. They were in a rundown old house in Coventry, Kentucky, just across the river from Ohio. And so they saw the ad and they called me up and said, hey, we're rockabilly guys from England. We should meet and talk about rockabilly. So I had a 1960s Studebaker, I had a vintage car, and I was working at a vintage clothing store. And I drove to Kentucky and I met Levi. There's a really great picture. He and I standing out in front of my Studebaker, and that's how I met Levi. And I didn't see him again. We were all talking about, got to go to New York. And it wasn't until probably almost a year later, maybe, I was in New York. I was walking down the Bowery one day and I saw him on the Bowery. It's like, oh my God, we're here. We made it. And then his band, Levi and the Rockettes, were playing on Halloween, and they opened for the Cramps. And that was the first time I saw them, and it was so exciting. They had records hanging on wires from the stage, spinning on the stage, and all these musical notes floating around. It was really cool, So
yes, well, absolutely. Because I thought it was amazing, because I've done, Smutty told me the story that he just literally got picked up in this club in Essex in England by Lee Childers and sort of taken to New York, and suddenly becomes part of that world with Robert Mapplethorpe and Andy Warhol. Yeah. And really,
they were definitely New York darlings, the Rockettes, because they're all so gorgeous. These gorgeous young men with these British accents, and the tattoos. They were so fabulous. They're just darlings. I'll never forget. Smutty told me one time when he met Lee, and Lee said to him, "Oh, we should start a band. You should be in a band." He said, "What would you rather play, bass or guitar?" And Smutty said, "What's the difference?"
I know, it's a bit like, come to New York, though you can't play and we've got no instruments, we'll work that out later. I thought,
we'll figure that out later. See, and that's what was cool about rockabilly at that time, because it had the punk mentality. You just needed to know a few chords, look good in the clothes, and have the right attitude. That's what it took, and that was very exciting. So because when we were playing rockabilly in New York City at that time, there were no rockabilly kids in the audience. They were punks. Remember, Sid Vicious would be in the audience. Johnny Thunders would be in the audience, So it wasn't a rockabilly scene particularly. It wasn't until I came to England the first time with Buzz and the Flyers, and we pulled up outside the Royalty Ballroom. I'll never forget. And there was a sea of kids all dressed in 50s clothes. And we were shocked. We're like, oh my God. And they went crazy. They went crazy to see a real American rockabilly band, and real American 50s clothes, It was very exciting. That's when I fell in love with England. I said, I got to go to England one of these days, because these kids know how to have a scene. In America, yes. It's like, if whatever band's in town, the kid just gets a T-shirt. That was the big joke. You get a Motorhead T-shirt for the weekend. You go see Motorhead. Then the next week you get a, T-Rex T-shirt. Whoever's playing, you put on the T-shirt. Cheap trick. It doesn't matter. It's not a scene. We're in England. If those kids get into something, it's like head to toe.
Yes.
They live it. And I really appreciated that, because that's what we did. We lived that rockabilly lifestyle, and we wore 50s clothes all the time. We even wore 50s underwear if we could find them. We just listened to 50s music, 50s guitars, everything was 50s.
Yeah, well, I did the interview with Levi And I mean, he was talking about how strict people were and the fact that you had to run, you had to do a lot of running in those days from, different groups who hated you, and
Yeah,
all this,
skinheads.
all this little variation that, there
Yeah.
was the traditional, Teds, there was rockabilly, there was, skinheads, there was punks, there was a bit of heavy metal, but it was very tribal. You couldn't just go, oh, I'll be something different next weekend. You just weren't. You signed it, and these guys are still living it. That's the thing that really is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Well, you see these, was it Crazy Caven? Crazy Caven. He just recently died, and he was still Crazy Caven, man. He had a bit of his sideboard still, even though he lost his quiff, But, he was probably 75 years old, man. He's old Teds, They've been Teds since they were 15.
So you had CBGBs. Was the Mud Club going at that stage, or was that still a bit late? Oh, that was already started.
Yeah, the Mud Club was happening. We played in the Mud Club a lot. That was a great place to play. It was a really cool place, the Mud Club. There was something about the Mud Club that was, I don't know, it was just a different vibe than CBs or Maxes. It's a different vibe.
Yes, that was kind of. I mean, there was probably others as well.
It was more of a party. The Mud Club was more of a party.
Yes,
you could go upstairs and be like a party would be happening on the second floor. Where Maxes, it was like there was a restaurant downstairs. You went upstairs to hear the bands, and there was a bar, and that was about it.
Yes.
It wasn't like a DJ. Well, that's the thing at the Mud Club. There was like a DJ playing, then a band would play. I mean, William H. Burroughs would be there, reciting poetry, and it was a very kind of exclusive place.
The Burroughs Bunker. That sounds an amazing place. And you had Victor Brockus. He's kind of the writer that I did an interview with Victor, and he told me about this time when he got sort of Andy Warhol, Burroughs, and Mick Jagger together. But he said he was so poor, he didn't manage to have any food. And there's this picture of them all looking really, he said it was a disastrous evening. He had to go to a garage and get some white bread from the garage and sort of gave. And he was thinking, God, and there's this photograph of them. And apparently it was really uncomfortable evening. And I was thinking, you had, Jagger, Burroughs, and Warhol, and you didn't have any money for food.
Wow. What did he do? Interview with them? I'm not familiar with this person.
He was trying to, I'll have to send you a link to this. He was trying to set up some sort of little kind of evening together, but they all just didn't. And Jagger wasn't very pleased because he didn't know why he was there. It sort of went down as a bit of a historic kind of moment in a small way of just like how not to have a dinner party,
Yeah.
with very famous people. So look, in the UK, I mean, obviously, because with the Rockettes, I mean, they never got the commercial success, but then you had the Stray Cats that kind of had massive success, didn't you? Yeah. So they were the ones that sort of really helped, and then the Cramps as well. And also in the UK, we had that post-punk period. So how come you went from America to to England? How did you manage to jump that one?
Well, it kind of started with the Stray Cats, actually, because the Stray Cats, I've told the story so many times, and it's like the Stray Cats were called the Tomcats at the time. And, they were these three young guys from Long Island that would come into the city and play. And, they were good, they were cute, and they were good. They were good. I mean, Brian Setzer's always been an excellent guitar player. They opened for Buzz and the Flyers, we didn't really think much about them, what I mean? And gradually, I forget what they did. Somehow they ended up going to England. We had been to England, and we knew the excitement that rockabilly had in England, so they went to England, and somehow it was a manager or, they just really had good connections. And I don't know exactly how it went, but they seemed to get their picture on the front of Rolling Stone magazine with Mick Jagger or with Keith Richards or something, some magazine, NME maybe, I don't know. And, they signed a record deal. And once they signed a record deal, they all got their tattoos, and they cut off their sleeves off their bowling shirts, and they really locked their image down, and they just skyrocketed, they just skyrocketed. And, I was young and kind of sensitive at the time, and I was very, I'll admit it, I was very jealous of their success, because we had been working for a while. We had a great reputation, us and the Rockettes. We were like the rockabilly bands in New York City. And all of a sudden, these guys, they called themselves, they changed their name to the Stray Cats. And, all of a sudden they're like everywhere. And we were like, what? How could this happen? What about us? But I understood it. There were three guys. They were very good. They were a great package. They have a record company's dream package, those guys, and so that's what happened. And then I remember when I think Runaway Boys had come out, and we were playing a gig somewhere, and some guy from a record company came and saw me, and he goes, he said, "So what do you think of the Stray Cats?" And I go, yeah. And he quoted me one of the lyrics from Runaway Boys, get kicked out because of kind of the, mom, dad curse the day you're born, and he said this to me like, pretty cool. And I just wasn't impressed. I was like, I'm sorry, man. It's like, I just know it too well. I'm too close to that. I didn't sing their praises, and it got back to them. And, because I was pretty close to Brian. I knew Brian pretty well, and he used to come into Trash and Vaudeville, and, got back to him, and it just kind of, just killed the relationship. And ultimately, it was the beginning of the end of rockabilly for me, because people started comparing us to the Stray Cats. People would say, "Oh, you guys sound like the Stray Cats. Oh, do you like the Stray Cats?" And I thought, if I hear another fucking person ask me about the goddamn Stray Cats, I'm going to lose my mind, And so then Buzz and the Flyers, we got off at the time, the Clash were doing like 2 weeks, I forget, 10 days. They did 10 days at Bonds, at this club on Times Square called Bonds. It was a really historic rock and roll event. And every night they had a different local New York band open for them. And so they asked us, we got chosen, we got the tap. "You want to open for the Clash one night?" And it's like, yeah. So we opened for the Clash, and Bernard Rhodes, their manager, he saw us. And he approached me and he said, "I really like you. I don't like your band. You're not going to get anywhere playing that music. The Stray Cats already did it." He said, "If you want to come to England, I will be your manager and get your record deal, introduce you to musicians, enable you to start a new band and get a fresh start if you want to come to England." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I broke up Buzz and the Flyers. I sold all my 50s. Actually, I sold all my 50s clothes at Kensington Market. I brought someone with me. I sold them at Kensington Market, and sold all my 50s furniture, broke up with my girlfriend. And I think probably within 2 weeks of him asking me, I was ready to go. And that was how I ended up in England. And I went right from the airport to Camden Yard and met the guys that were in Subway Sect, and the Vic Goddard.
Yeah.
They were doing Club Left at the time at the old Whiskey A Go-Go in Waldorf Street on Thursday nights. And they had seen Buzz and the Flyers, and we came over and we played at Dingwalls. They had seen us, so they knew who I was. And they were like, "Yeah, let's do this." And so we worked up a few songs. And so they had like a cabaret thing at Club Left. And I would sing a couple of songs. We had a girl named Lady Blue would sing a couple of songs. And then Vic Goddard would come on and sing, in his bow tie, doing the Songs for Sale. You remember all that?
Yes.
Doing that whole Dickie Bow, crooner thing. It was a good idea. And we did that for a while. And eventually I was like, I didn't want to be just one singer in a lineup, and Vic didn't like to tour. He didn't like to tour. And I thought, man, I didn't come to England just to do this. I said, I want to get a deal. I want to get a hit. I want to get hit records. I want to go as far as I can go with this. I said, we should just start a band, start from scratch, get rid of the bow ties, get rid of all this Dickie Bow stuff, and just find a new image. And the guys agreed. They said, "Yeah, we want to do that too. We're not happy with not touring and, Vic being difficult." And so difficult in that way.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. And we just buckled down, and, Bernie just kind of, picked up the tab, and we just stayed in Camden Yard every day. It was like going to a job every day. I was living in Tooting Bec at the time. And every day I'd take the train to Camden Yard, and we'd stay there all day writing songs and rehearsing and talking about what kind of band we wanted to be and what we wanted to look like. And we were working on looks and images, and they introduced me to Dexys.
Right.
Dexys, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool. I like that." And I was really into Marlon Brando and On the Waterfront and all that stuff. I thought that was a good way to go. And so between Dexys and me bringing the American part of Brando and On the Waterfront, then we kind of developed the JoBoxers look, and the whole, and plus the music was kind of just natural, it was soul, it was rock, it was soul and rock and roll and bluesy and swinging. Mainly
Yes.
it was swinging. Everything was like swinging, and that combination just really worked, And so
Yes, it was a very definite image, wasn't it? You sort of, because it was kind of interesting because actually is that I mean, in the UK, Thatcher had just got into power in 79. There'd been the Falkland War. There had been sort
yeah,
of a lot of unemployment with young people. So that there was there was quite a sort of separation between the people who were sort of going to be probably more mainstream chart success and the more indie world as well. So there was a sort of a divide, wasn't there? Because you had those kind of clubs where people like Boy George and Marilyn and Spandau Ballet all hung out, and London also had a bit of a jazz scene, didn't it, as well, with people
yeah.
like
Ronnie Scott's. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
Sade's
Sade.
bands, and then
Yeah,
there was Working Week and people like that, and Loose Ends. So there was kind of London did seem very cosmopolitan to people like me who weren't in London really at the time, because you also had that magazine, didn't you, The Face, that came out, and
yeah.
there was definitely this kind of look that people started to go through.
Well, there was that hard time image, that hard time issue. Hard
Yes.
times, and it had like jeans with ripped up jeans, and everybody looked like they were had been drugged behind a pickup truck or something. Everyone was all beat up looking, and that became like a real thing to latch onto.
I always remember at the cinema there used to be an advert for Southern Comfort, and that used to slightly have that nostalgia thing, wasn't it? That sort of America from the 50s that we all vaguely knew because of films that we'd seen, but obviously hadn't lived in America in the 50s as well. But kind of
Yeah,
going back to things like The Last Picture Show, wasn't there? With was that Jeff Bridges?
yeah,
And all that kind of, and there was a film called The Warriors as well. There was a lot of
yeah.
kind of nostalgia, and I remember James Dean being a big thing in the 80s as well, looking, I don't know, not, East of Eden, Giant, and the Rebel
Rebel
Without a
Without a
Cause.
Cause.
Yeah,
Yeah,
those, as well as Brando, who was like, Jesus, look at that guy with his
I know.
bears.
I know. All that stuff really, really kind of got dug up and became a real hook for a lot of people. A lot of people started even there's so many, a lot of guys around that time. For instance, someone like Spear of Destiny, Kirk Brandon. Was it Kirk Brandon? Was that his name?
Yeah.
He had that look. He had like that 50s haircut, and he looked very 50s. Even though he wasn't doing anything 50s, but he had that look. Even Morrissey at that, had like a 50s look. All those guys.
Yes, absolutely. He loved his quiff, didn't he? So
Yeah.
so the band got their sort of look, but they also got the sound together very quickly, didn't you? Things sort of lined up, that sort of honeymoon period. Because having done this show for a long time, I mean, there's most bands have this 5-year narrative, don't they? They have this sort of 18 months kind of getting it together, or 12 months. And with a lot of indie bands I've done, it would be John Peel giving it a play, then you get a John Peel session, the first album, things going good. And also there was a lot of clubs around the UK, so you could always get gigs up and down the country quite easily, because there's always a venue which, on a Monday, Wednesday night, people could just get 200 people quite happily going along, just because it was, cheap as chips as well, wasn't it? There was a big live circuit. So what was because you weren't quite in that indie world, were you? You didn't sort of.
No, we weren't in the indie world at all. We were going for commercialism. We wanted hit records. We weren't interested in a cult thing. Some little small group of things. So we really, and we built a following by playing live in those places that you're mentioning. All those little, all up around the country, all up and down the country, in London. We were playing gigs all the time. And that's how we really built a following, just from playing live. By the time we got a record deal, we already had a big following just from gigs. We had a notorious reputation for live shows. I mean, we would just, we were, if I say so myself, we were really fucking good live, and so it was like, and at the time also, it was also around the time when a lot of bands in the charts weren't, that was around the time people were known for not really playing live. They made records, but they didn't really play live.
Yes.
That was kind of a thing that was going on. So to be able to really play live was a real plus, because some bands couldn't do it. I mean, I don't think you could go see Kajagoogoo regularly someplace, and they really brought the house down.
No, they didn't come to Norwich Arts Centre or the or sort of the Harlow in Essex, or sort of, the Princess Charlotte in Leicester, did they? They weren't sort of a touring band.
Probably not. No, even Depeche Mode in those days were probably not particularly known for live gigs.
Yes.
Because they were so electronic. So there were groups like Big Country. I remember doing doing Top of the Pops with Big Country. I wasn't crazy about Big Country, but I liked I liked their energy on stage. They really could play. They had a good show. I remember we were someplace and we played in the same town one night, and then we stayed at the same hotel. And I remember seeing, Stuart, at breakfast in the hotel, asking him how the gig went, so it was kind of tragic. It was kind of tragic what happened to him, but it's a long time ago, man. You just never know what your fate is going to be. But playing live was a real plus. Even Culture Club, those kind of groups, they weren't really known for live shows, And
well, I think they sort of just went big so quickly. They almost became. Well, the music was obviously important, but it wasn't like one of these bands that spent years playing live, grinding, going up and down the motorway in a transit van.
No,
unloading their kit at sort of 4 a.m, sort of having to sort of get up the next day.
Right, switching drivers. That's what your turn to drive. Oh,
and you get that feeling. I mean, the Beatles, spent years, didn't they? Sort of. The manager thought, well, this is quite a good band, but I think you need working on. So they sent them to Hamburg, roughly.
Yeah.
And they played the Tavern Club,
Yeah, and it showed, because I remember even when I became old enough to really appreciate the Beatles' musicality, their musicianship. And I remember you watch old clips of the Beatles, they never look at their hands playing guitar. They rarely, they're playing those guitars without a second thought. Just from all that live touring and just live playing, I remember I saw a clip of them play. There's all the clips come up online now, these really weird shows, the Beatles playing someplace live, and you're like, wow, look at that. And I remember playing, I saw her standing there and Paul McCartney's singing, and the bass line in that song is so busy, like, and he's just singing away and playing that bass line. I'm like, God, these guys were so good. They were so talented, man.
Yes, I believe singing and playing bass is quite a difficult art. So, well, Paul was, and like people like David Bowie. I mean, he spent the whole '60s kind of going nowhere fast, and then sort of managed to get it together with Hunky Dory and then Ziggy Stardust. But he'd spent a good 5 years in various bands, touring up and down the country,
honing his craft. Learning how to do it. And that'll take you right through. It really will.
But then you sort of, is it because you had the big single? Is that a blessing is that sometimes not the best thing that happens to a band, even though at the time you think, God, this is brilliant, we've got the hit single, because it
was the worst thing that could have happened to us. It was the first one. You mean Boxerbeat?
Yes.
Yeah, Boxerbeat. It was like number 3 in the charts, No, I think David Bowie was number 1, Duran Duran was number 3, and there we were. We're like, who are we? Well, what are we doing? Number 3 in the charts, It just seems so crazy, but I'll never forget going in a little smoke shop in my neighborhood. I lived in Kensal Rise at the time, and I used to go in this little smoke shop and get my, Sun newspaper and my pack of Silk Cut or whatever I was smoking at the time, and it was run by an Indian family, and the woman was in there in her traditional English clothes. And I used to go in all the time. And one morning I went in and she had the radio on, and Boxerbeat came on the radio. And I said, oh my God, I said, that's my song. That's my song. She goes, very good, very good, very good. She was so kind of excited for me, even though she didn't, okay. But yeah, and it was kind of like, we went the wrong way, because that was number 3. Then Just Got Lucky's number 7. And so we just went the wrong direction in the charts. So, it's like having your first song be number 1, whereas there's nowhere to go but down. You're not going to keep getting number 1s one after another, unless you're the Beatles or something, that doesn't happen. So it was kind of the kiss of death for us. It really was.
Yeah. I mean, how do you sort of, I suppose there's a lot of bands who've, not a lot, but there are bands who just went, wow, you just kind of hear them. There's that song that you just think, God, that's kind of pop perfection. Whether you like it or not, you realize that song is so good. You can see why it's kind of just going to go straight to the top. So
Yeah.
then what, as a band, how do you then sort of cope with trying to follow up with the album and then kind of...
Well, you know, we had a lot of material, so the album wasn't a problem. You know, we had all the material. We had we had 2 sets worth of material. So, you know, we just went in and recorded the songs that we had been playing, you know, and the record company came to some rehearsals and they said, oh, this one should be a single. This one should be a single. And we just, you know, okay. But, you know, the album was not a flop. You know, I think it was got to number 18 or something. So, you know, it wasn't a flop, but, you know, it was after all that. It took a while before, I think after Johnny Friendly, we did one episode. We did one Top of the Pops at Johnny Friendly, and Johnny Friendly was my favorite. I really wanted that song to be a hit. I thought we should have come out with Johnny Friendly first. You know, that should have been the first song because I thought it was just a great song and told a story. It was all about On the Waterfront. You know, it had a real story and a real atmosphere, that song. But, you know, record company didn't think it was, you know, a hit. So, you know, after that came out, it didn't go anywhere. You know, just things got progressively worse. And then we were bad with business, of course. You know, we had a manager who was like a friend, and Bernie Rhodes was gone by then, you know, and we had a manager who was a friend, and his heart was in the right place, but he had no idea how to deal with record companies and, you know, business. And we were all pretty wild and misbehaved a lot. You know, we were playing, you know, little ruffian pop stars, you know, running around terrorizing the record company and getting drunk and, you know, just doing all the stuff that you do, you know.
Yes,
that's what
absolutely.
you do, having a really good time, enjoying the success. And, you know, eventually it catches up with you. And I forget all the gory details, but RCA wanted, I forget what they wanted from us. And all the Suits came to see us in one gig at the Hammersmith Palais or something. The Suits came, and I was always, you know, resentful of authority, you know, and the kind of the James Dean, Marlon Brando thing in me, where someone comes in the room with authority, and I'm the guy that's going to say "fuck you" eventually, or do something that's going to piss them off, and I did, and I pissed them off, and they put an injunction on us, and we couldn't sign a deal or record anything for 18 months. And in those 18 months, we just kind of disappeared, you know, and we came back with a single called "Is This Really the First Time?" Single that was just awful. I can't even listen to that song now. You know, it just sounds like a really bad attempt to recapture the success of Just Got Lucky. It's one of those kind of songs. It's that kind of a song with the hook and the verse and, you know, and all that kind of like, ho hum, here we go again stuff, you know. And so eventually it was just like, I remember telling the guys, I said, my heart's not in this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Then we had some offers for, you know, small little indie labels came to us and were trying to offer us things. And I wasn't interested. My heart wasn't in it. And once my heart wasn't in it, I thought, I don't want to do it. And so I just walked away. I don't want to do this. And I had like a solo deal for a while that went nowhere. And, you know, I was kind of lost, those lost years, you know.
Yes.
You know, like I had a summer of heroin, you know, all those moments, you know, after, you know, post success, you know, and you just kind of try to find your footing. You don't know what to do. And that's when I discovered acting, you know. I thought, well, let's see what this Marlon Brando stuff is all about.
Yes, well, I remember in the 80s we were very excited with that term method acting, because we'd also seen a lot of Robert De Niro, didn't we, with Mean Streets and Taxi Driver, and so, you know, this, and then the French cinema with Betty Blue and Diva and all those kind of angsty. So, you know, the cinema was a big thing in the 80s, I seem to remember. Again, those kind of, you know, the Scorsese films and, you know, French cinema and anything else that you could feel kind of arty with, which I did enjoy. But, you know, method acting was, you know, Brando, and not having a clue what people were talking about, but going, yes, method acting, you get into the character, marvelous.
Yeah. Well, so funny, because I just had a Zoom meeting a few minutes ago. That was David Strasberg's 50th birthday. You know, Lee Strasberg, kind of the father of method acting.
Oh,
you know,
yes.
It's so weird because I eventually, you know, went to the Strasberg Institute in London. I enrolled for a semester. I thought, what's this acting all about? So I enrolled for a semester, and I had a friend who went to Central Drama School. And I said to him, he was a roadie for JoBoxers, you know, and he was an actor. He'd gone to drama. And I said, so what do they teach you in drama school? He said, they taught me how to stand still. And I was like, are you taking a piss? What do you mean by that? And he goes, no, he taught me how to stand still. And I know he was kind of goofing, but at the end of the day, when I actually started studying acting, I learned that, yeah, you got to learn how to stand still. That was part of it. You got to really know how to stand still. You can't be all over the place and making all these expressions. And so I got a scholarship. I did a scene for Anna Strasberg, Lee Strasberg, his wife, and I got a scholarship and I started studying there, and I fell in love with the craft. I really fell in love with it. I thought that this is everything I had been doing kind of led me to that.
Yes.
It really did. And I thought, this is what I need to be doing right now. This is exactly what I should be doing. Forget pop music. I was a pop star. I did that. I'm not interested in trying to regain that, and I didn't consider myself some kind of fabulous singer enough to think, oh, I want to be a great singer. I'm going to make these fabulous records and show everybody what a wonderful singer I am. I could sing and I think I have a good voice, but that wasn't my fire. That wasn't what my desire was particularly. So that's why the solo deal didn't really work. So I continued studying. And the wonderful thing about studying that craft and falling in love with the craft of acting for me was because I'd always wanted to get rich and famous, and then once what I learned at the Strasberg Institute was I learned that I was an artist. I discovered that I was an artist, and I thought I had a wonderful teacher. He said, you're an artist. You got to embrace the art in yourself, and forget about fame and forget about, people knowing who you are. Just get good at your craft, fall in love with this craft and get good at it. And then things will fall into place. Things will happen, just focus on that. It's about that. It's about the work.
Yes.
And that's what I did. And eventually they kicked me out. They said, we want, you got to pay if you want to continue to study. And so,
were you in London at this stage?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I was still in London. By then it was, our big success year was 83.
Yes.
And so I was kind of in the wilderness until 80. I think I started going to the Strasberg studio in 87, something like that. And I studied there for, I don't know, about 3 years or so regularly. And like I say, they kicked me out and they said, you can continue to go, but you have to pay. And I said, they told me that you should go out and try to work as an actor, go get an agent, try to get a manager, go into auditions and try to work as an actor. And so that's what I did. And eventually I was fortunate and I started working as an actor. I was lucky because there were only a handful of Black American guys, around my age in London at the time. So we all had the same agent. So if an audition or for a part came up and it was right for one of us, either I got it or he got it or he got it or he got it. It wasn't like this huge pool of actors that you had to like struggle and, it was cutthroat. It was like, and that was great because it enabled me to work. So I did TV shows. I did one thing I did that was really lucrative and a lot of fun was voiceovers. Did a lot of voiceover work. Eddie Murphy movies would come over to the UK and I would do the radio ads.
Right.
The distinguished gentleman, I do these go in and I would just go in and, I'd spend it, I remember I did one for a hair dryer or something. And all I said was new Braun style and go. That's all I said, new Braun style. I went in and said it about 3 or 4 times, and I made like 5,000 pounds, all this money just for that, so it was great.
That is
so
amazing.
I know. So it was really good. But, then I got into the West End, and I got into Five Guys Named Mo in the West End. That was when I was really tested, because I didn't like musicals. My manager said, oh, there's this musical they're auditioning for. And I go, I hate musicals. It's like singing in the rain. What am I going to do? Little Abner, what is this? But I went along and after some struggling, I got the part because all I had to do was sing and act. I didn't have to dance. All the other 5 guys did the dancing. So it was a perfect part for me.
And that must have really pushed you physically, because actually that's a bit of a different gig, doing sometimes 2 shows a day.
Well, you do 8 shows a week, 8 shows a week. You got 2 on Saturday. You got a matinee and you got an evening show. Well, what it really did was it really helped me clean up my act. Because I learned early on in New York that I couldn't get high or drunk and go on stage. I had to be sober. Excuse me. And I have some friends who didn't have that Achilles heel, as it were. They could
Yes.
perform, they could go on stage in any state, and it led a lot of them to hit a wall because they do a tour, they do a show, don't even remember what they did, and some of them got damaged, they got hurt, they got all kind of crazy stuff happened. So that really saved me. So doing Five Guys was because I used to take a lot of cocaine, and I thought I can't keep doing this and do 8 shows a week. I have to keep myself in good physical shape. So I was making a lot of money, so I got a personal trainer. He'd come to my house, knock on the door. I had a little gym set up, and he'd work me out like crazy. And I'd go do those shows. And Saturday night, that was the thing. After the 8th show on Saturday night, I went a little crazy. I went a little crazy on that last show, but I felt like I earned it. It was good. I'd go to the Groucho Club and Fred's. There are all these really great clubs in the West End, and if you were in a big show in the West End, you kind of had carte blanche to all the clubs, all the exclusive clubs. You got like just the instant membership if you were in a big hit show. So, and that was cool. But I'd always kind of clean myself up come Sunday afternoon, and then Monday morning the trainer would come, and bam, right back on that, on it. It was wonderful.
You just have to do a few squats and lunges and press ups, and you're thinking, Jesus, you can't mess around the night before, can you? Because that burns your muscles. I know. I'm obsessed with Les Mills, those kind of classes. I do the body pump and body balance, and it's interesting that you just think, how, because it always hurts, doesn't it? It's never easy. You never think
it's never easy, but you feel much better when you're done, right? You feel like you're glad you did it.
It feels great when you do it. So this was throughout the 90s. Did you then? Is this the rest of your career, or did you go into other? Did music come back into your life?
Not until one second, close the door. I moved to LA in 95. Five Guys closed, and I moved to LA in 95. And from there, I, just set out to become a working actor in Los Angeles. Music didn't come back into it until probably I got a call, and someone was interested in me doing a Buzz and the Flyers set in Green Bay, Wisconsin, at some rockin' festival up there. They had this rock and roll festival, and enough time had passed that I was like, yeah, I think I'd like to do that. And so, the guy organized a backing band for me, and they had worked out all the songs, they knew the songs. And so I went to Green Bay, Wisconsin, probably was it 2005, I think, something like that, 2005, and did a show, and it was kind of cool. I enjoyed myself. And I think I did another one too, another Green Bay premiere a couple of years later. And then I just kind of put it down. I just wasn't interested anymore. I was really focusing on my acting and my family. I had married, and I got an 18-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son. So I just was focusing on my acting, and it was very difficult. As you can imagine, it's very difficult to make a living as an actor in Los Angeles. I never did. I did in England, but once I moved here, it was like I always had to do something else. So I became I was always in the clothes and style. So I became a wardrobe stylist on commercials.
Right.
I had a friend who was, she was a stylist on a commercial. And so she hired me and said, I need you to help me, style people. So it was great. I loved that job. We'd go out and go to the costume house, Universal Costume House, and all these huge rooms full of clothes, and you would see the cast, and you'd go out and choose clothes for the people in the cast and parade them in front of the director, and maintain them, and it was a great job. It was really kind of paid very well, so that enabled me to kind of survive, until then I got some good acting gigs along the way,
Yes.
along the way. But music was, and I didn't do music again until, what year was that? 2015. 2015, I did a Viva Las Vegas show, a big rockabilly festival in Las Vegas called Viva Las Vegas, and it's huge. And
Yes.
And I went and played Buzz and the Flyers set there, and I got my original drummer from Buzz and the Flyers, rock rolls, kid from Brooklyn, and everybody. And the other two guys were different guys. Well, actually, the guitar player had been in the Rockettes, Barry Ryan. He had been in the Rockettes. And the bass player was another guy named Joey Cupcakes, we used to call him. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. But then, and that's it. I got my guitar over there. I strum it every once in a while. I still only know the chords I knew all those years ago. I never learned any other chords. So if I pick it up, I just can't play anything but rockabilly songs.
Well, that's good. So where does that? So on the acting front, that was kind of what you just mentioned. Was there anything else that sort of came up during that period? Or was it just kind of the odd show, the odd bit of TV?
Well, being a songwriter, I was always, a poet without really thinking about being a poet per se. And so well, there's a couple of things that happened around that time. I was studying acting. I was still in acting classes, and I discovered that I really enjoyed teaching acting. I was taking classes with this one particular teacher, and he was a good acting teacher, but he wasn't doing the kind of work that I learned, as I was training. And I told him, I said, I can teach the relaxation and sensory work, real foundational method acting techniques. So I started teaching that in his class, and I really enjoyed it. And one thing led to another. I became a member of the Actors Studio, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's quite a prestigious organization. It's been going on since the 40s with, Kazan and Brando. All those people are members of the Actors Studio. I became a member of the Actors Studio, and then I met a woman there who was teaching at the Strasberg Institute here in Los Angeles. And so I said, what do you got to do to get a job teaching over there? She goes, well, come over. I'll introduce you to David. Because I never met David Strasberg. I met his mother in London, but not David. He was a kid then. I mean, he just turned 50, So I went and I met him, and he hired me. So I was like subbing. That's like 2008. So I was subbing off and on there. And eventually I realized I really want to be an acting teacher. I'm still an actor, but I don't audition. Yeah. So I thought this is everything that I've been doing now has led me to this, to being a teaching this craft, teaching method acting. And that's what I do. That's what I do. And I teach method acting, and I'm a poet, and I write poetry all the time. I've been published in a number of literary magazines, literary journals. And, right now I'm writing I've told myself I'm going to write some sort of a memoir poem that kind of covers my life in Ohio, because I've been reading a lot of Walt Whitman. Right. And I read a lot of classic poets. Walt Whitman. I'm crazy about Charles, or what's his name? Kaufman. Charles Kaufman. What's his name? I can't think of his name. My God. What is his name? Bob Kaufman. Right. Yeah, Bob Kaufman. Beat poets. I love beat poetry. I love Kerouac. I know all that Kerouac stuff. I love that stuff. So I listen to that, and I read that stuff all the time. I have a nice collection of poetry over here. I'm always reading something, and I've been reading Whitman and Song of Myself, this one particular book. It's taken from Leaves of Grass, which is his classic piece. And I can't read. I don't really read as much poetry as I'd like, because as soon as I start reading something, next thing you know, I get an idea and I'm writing. Which is wonderful. Yes. Which is kind of absolutely what should happen. But sometimes I think, God, I can't get through this damn book. I've written 10 poems since I started reading it, but I can't seem to finish this book. So that's, right now, that's my focus, my family and teaching method acting, and on Zoom now because the plague. Yes. And writing poetry, and just trying, I'm trying to get my own, I've self-published one book, but I'm submitting all the time, trying to get published, trying to get a book published. I don't want to self-publish. I want someone to publish my book. I've had offers, people wanting to publish it, but I have to pay. I'm like, nah, it's not the same. I want you to publish. You pay, you publish it, and I'll just sit here and go, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, was it the case then that I read that you're not the original band, but you're, JoBoxers, was that going to have a couple of dates last year, and then obviously because of the plague it got pulled, or was that just? Yeah,
well, right now we're scheduled to which is, I won't say I don't think it's going to happen, but I don't have a lot of confidence. We're supposed to play the 100 Club in October, right? I forget the date. Sometime in October, we're supposed to play the 100 Club. They've been advertising it. People have tickets. there's a picture of us going around from 35 years ago, and it's like, okay, I it already scheduled once and got pushed because of the pandemic. Now they scheduled it again, and I would love to do it, but I'm not going to get on an airplane until I feel really safe. I mean, it's not like I'm going to risk my life to go play Boxerbeat again at this point,
Yes, no. I mean, I think most people I spoke to, they kind of started to be quite realistic going, 2022, I think, most
Yeah,
bands, most people
yeah,
are just thinking, I don't want to kind of keep booking things and can't, because it kind of is draining and it's like disappointing. You can do it once last year. I think this year you're just thinking, oh, can we just do it next 2022?
yeah. 2022. That's more realistic. I mean, we
Kind of,
got the vaccination now. I've been trying to get vaccinated. It's all full up, and it's not like it's difficult. It's like getting tickets to see I don't know, the Grateful Dead. It's really hard.
yes. It is, I know, I suppose, I mean, fingers crossed, but, you just think, it's that, it's like, I'm not going to build, I suppose you're thinking, well, great, but I'm not going to be too surprised if it gets pulled, is it really?
Exactly. And I'll get myself in shape. I'll start singing the songs and try to remember all the lyrics. And, I'll gradually I'm going to set a time when I'm going to start preparing casually, start
Yes.
singing in the car, get my voice together, start trying to remember all the songs, and maybe get a set list to send to the guys in the band, say, I'd like to do this. And, kind of act like it's going to happen as much as I can. Because the last thing I want to do is don't think it's going to happen. And then all of a sudden, it sneaks up on me. Oh, what's going to happen? Oh, shit. No one's wearing a mask anymore. It's real. I'm not ready. Well, how'd that song go again? I'll start forgetting songs and forgetting lyrics. I don't do that. It's going to be tough enough, doing it at this point,
Yes, absolutely. But so we know, because you did the first album, which went, you did the other Skin and Bone and Missing Link. Did Missing Link ever come out, or did it?
No, it never came out. The second album never came out. And we recorded a third album too. It never came out. Yeah, I mean, it was all business. All the business was bad, It was bad, and everything was there was nobody in charge. Let's put it like that. There was no adult we needed an adult in charge.
Right.
Someone to sort of come in and say, okay, you guys, and what is it you want to do? What is it you want to do? And then we tell them to go, okay, in that case, here's what you need to stop doing, and here's what you need to start doing. And here's what you need to forget about, and here's what you need to focus on. And we never had that. So it was all kind of left to chance somehow. All I wanted to do was write songs and perform.
Yeah.
That was where my focus was. Okay, how much? Okay, fine. Okay, good. Let's get back to rehearsal. I just wanted to rehearse and do the songs, and that was my interest, So, and along the way, everything just crumbled,
Yes, it's difficult, isn't it? You do need that Brian Epstein or that kind of person.
Exactly. You need the guy in the suit to come in, and say, okay, here's what needs to happen.
I'll do the talk, and you guys just don't fuck it up.
Yeah, don't fuck it up, because I mean, how many bands fuck it up? Most bands do. I remember having a conversation with Paul McGuinness at Limelight one night, and I was drunk, and he was saying, "How's the band?" And I'm like, he goes, "Here's what you got to have in your band." And he was basically telling me that we needed a guy like him, And and U2, they were big then. This is probably 1986, 85, maybe. They were big, but they were not nearly as big as they became.
Yes.
Here's the guy that guided U2, and he's telling me what I needed, and I was just too drunk to kind of take it in,
Well, it is interesting, isn't it? Because having done this show for such a long time, I've realised that you do need that manager, but there's not many managers like that. So it's very unlucky, isn't it? Well, lucky for them. Because actually, when U2 started, I thought, they're all right, but they're nothing special. I thought Big Country were much better. And then I loved bands like the Smiths and Husker Du and all those. And, they just didn't have management, and they didn't have someone who just a Brian Epstein who just went, right, let's this is the big picture. We could be really rich and famous, and you'll never have to do anything else apart from this.
You never have to grow up.
Or you could completely cock it up and you could be back at square one feeling kind of like, oh no, did we just mess it up? Yeah,
you just mess it up, and you don't get a lot of chances, No.
No.
I mean, ultimately, I feel lucky that we even got a record deal. I mean, how many bands get a record deal ultimately? I mean, especially in those days, everybody wanted a record deal. So if you got a record deal and a big advance, you kind of thought I've arrived. You didn't think this is the beginning.
Yes.
It was almost kind of like, well, this is how it's going to be from now on, rather than, okay, this is the beginning. Now we got to really guide this thing and steer this thing and make sure this thing stays on track if we want to keep it going, because somehow you think it's just going to carry on its own momentum, and it doesn't.
This is true. This is very true. So look, you almost answered it probably before, but if you were able to tell your 16 or 18-year-old self some sort of bit of advice or wisdom who was starting out, either in music or just live, really, I mean, with all the decades of experience, what would you sort of just kind of want to whisper in their ear, just in case they might want to listen?
A couple of things. One of the main things I would whisper in their ear is save your money. Learn how to deal with money. Be smart with your money. Invest your money. Be smart with your money. And then I would also, and I tell my students this, my acting students this, find yourself a mentor. Find a mentor. Look around in your life and who can mentor you. I mentor young actors now. I have this one actor in particular that I mentor because I made a lot of mistakes as an actor too. I never got famous as an actor. And a lot of the reasons because I didn't have a mentor and all that. But it's really important that you have somebody in your life who is not a family member for a start, and who believes in you, really believes in you, and can guide you and can give you really sound advice about the steps you need to take, keep you on track. That is just crucial, a mentor. I think anyone who's gotten successful has a mentor. There was somebody who they could call up late at night, or they could, call them up and say, I'm feeling like doing something crazy, or I'm drinking too much, whatever, I got this girlfriend, she's driving me crazy. And they just come over and say, break up with her. You want me to break up with her for you? I'll do it. I'll take care of it. Okay. Because you know what I mean? Because, when you're young and impressionable and, you go to where things smell the sweetest, you avoid the things that cause you anxiety and cause you stress. You avoid them, and someone needs to take care of it. It's got to get taken care of. So you need someone to do that. So that's what I would say.
Yes.
Save your money and get a mentor.
Yes. Tony Robbins. Get Tony Robbins on the case. I don't know. I went to one of his workshops once, a 4-day or 5-day workshop. It was
Did
good.
You? Yeah, I know his son, Scott.
Oh, right.
Yeah, actually, I was in an acting class with him for a long time, years ago.
Yeah. Well, there were things he said which I thought, oh, okay, that's good advice. Some of it.
Yeah, I'm sure he's got a lot of valuable things to say.
And it's good. It's good. But look, thank you ever so much for this. I'm so appreciative of this.
My pleasure.
I can always send you the link, and you can always post it if you want, but it'll be fantastic. So thank you again. So it worked.
Great. Thank you, David.
Look, take care there and have a lovely day.
All right, you too. All the best. Cheers.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that is how you say goodbye. And that is also the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Timothy Wayne Ball, from the JoBoxers, and also Buzz and the Flyers. That's it. This has been David Eastaugh, the C86 Show. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show. Also, all these archive interviews have been archived. That's the word. Yes, anyway, it's a bit of a conversational cul-de-sac, but don't worry, I'm not going to edit that out. So you can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Just do C86 Show. And that, as they say in the world of showbiz, is the end. Well, that's what Jim Morrison once said. So anyway, have a great week. Stay safe. That's it. Bye.